The candles were already melting. Thin rivers of wax slid down toward the white frosting while their tiny flames flickered weakly in the still air. The massive dining room of the Moretti mansion sat completely silent, the kind of silence that made even the ticking of a watch feel loud. Adrian Moretti watched the candles burn. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't touch the cake. Midnight had passed 14 minutes ago. 28 years old, the most powerful young mafia boss in Chicago, sitting alone at his own birthday table. Adrian leaned back slowly in the dark leather chair, his broad shoulders relaxing only slightly as his eyes drifted across the enormous room. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, walls covered with rare paintings worth more than most people's homes, and not a single person inside it who actually wanted to be there. His gold wristwatch caught the light when he checked the time again. The elegant timepiece had been a gift from a European weapons broker, too. Years ago, one of many gifts from men who feared Adrian Moretti more than they respected him. The watch was flawless, precise, cold, just like him. Adrian's fingers tapped the table once, then stopped. The black ink of his tattoos stretched across his forearms and climbed toward his neck, symbols that told a story few people fully understood. Some marked the years he survived on the streets. Others represented loyalty, battles won, enemies buried. Every mark had meaning. Every mark had blood behind it. He wore them openly, not as decoration, but as warning. At 6'2", Adrian carried himself with the calm authority of someone who had never needed permission to take power. His black suit fit perfectly against his athletic frame, and his clean-shaven face held a quiet intensity that made people nervous even when he said nothing. Tonight, however, that intensity carried something else. Disappointment, not that he would admit it. Outside the dining room windows, the city of Chicago glowed beneath the winter night. Traffic lights blinked red and green like distant stars. Sirens wailed somewhere far away. Adrian owned half the streets in that city. But not one person had knocked on his door tonight. No phone calls, no messages, no celebration. Just a cake his staff had quietly placed on the table earlier before disappearing into the shadows of the mansion like ghosts. Adrian stared at the cake again. Chocolate. He hadn't eaten chocolate cake since he was 16. Back when birthdays meant something. Back before power came with conditions. He reached for the candle lighter, hesitated, then set it down again. What was the point? Celebrating alone felt more pathetic than not celebrating at all. A soft knock echoed faintly from somewhere in the house. Adrian's eyes lifted instantly. His body stilled. Every instinct sharpened. In his world, unexpected sounds were rarely harmless. He listened carefully. Nothing, just silence again. He exhaled slowly and leaned back in the chair. Probably one of the guards outside shifting position. The Moretti mansion was heavily protected cameras, security gates, armed men positioned around the property. Anyone foolish enough to try entering uninvited wouldn't make it past the first checkpoint. Another sound came. A knock again. This time closer. Adrian frowned slightly. That hadn't come from outside. It came from the kitchen hallway. He stood. The chair legs scraped softly against marble as he rose to his full height. Movement revealed the tall, commanding figure that made even hardened criminals step aside when he walked into a room. Adrian adjusted the cuff of his sleeve and glanced at the tattoos on his forearm before heading toward the hallway. The house lights responded automatically as he moved through the corridor, casting warm light across the dark wood walls. Another knock, then a quiet voice. "Hello?" Adrian stopped mid-step. That voice definitely did not belong to one of his men. It sounded gentle, female. He continued toward the back door. When he opened it, the cold night air rushed inside. Standing on the small service porch was Elena Rivera, the maid. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose bun, and she looked both nervous and embarrassed standing beneath the porch light. Her simple winter coat was zipped to her chin. Beside her stood two small children. The boy was maybe 6 years old, gripping the sleeve of her coat with both hands. The little girl beside him looked a year older and was holding a slightly crooked cardboard box like it contained something extremely important. All three froze when the door opened, because standing in front of them was Adrian Moretti. Up close, he looked even more intimidating, tall, sharp-eyed, calm in a way that suggested danger lived just beneath the surface. The tattoos along his neck were visible now, disappearing beneath his collar. Matteo immediately hid behind Elena's leg. Elena looked like she might faint. "Mr. Moretti." "Sorry," she said quickly. Her voice trembled slightly. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I know it's late. Adrian studied them without speaking. His gaze moved from Elena to the children. The little girl didn't seem scared. She looked curious, almost excited. Finally, Adrian spoke, his voice low and steady. "What are you doing here?" Elena swallowed. "My babysitter canceled tonight," she explained nervously. "I had to bring them while I finished the kitchen earlier. They saw the cake and hesitated. They wanted to come back and give you something." The little girl stepped forward before Elena could stop her. She held out the cardboard box. "Happy birthday." Adrian blinked. The words hung in the cold air between them. No one had said that to him all day. Elena quickly added, "They insisted. I told them you were busy. We can leave right away if you want." Adrian looked down at the box, then slowly reached out and took it. Inside sat a tiny homemade cake. The frosting was uneven. The candles were crooked. Bright rainbow sprinkles covered the top like someone had poured them on with too much enthusiasm. It was clearly made by children. Adrian's large tattooed hands looked enormous holding something so small. The boy peeked out from behind Elena. "We weren't sure if Mafia bosses like chocolate," he said quietly. Elena covered her face with one hand. "Matteo." Adrian stared at the cake for a long moment. Then he asked calmly, "What are your names?" The little girl beamed. Proudly, "I'm Lily." She pointed to the boy. "And he's Matteo." Adrian nodded slightly. Then he looked at Elena again. "You brought them here, at midnight, to give me cake." Her cheeks turned red with embarrassment. "They wouldn't stop asking," she admitted softly. Matteo shrugged. "It's your birthday." Adrian looked at the three of them standing awkwardly on the porch. Cold wind brushed past. Lily's hands were starting to shake from holding the box earlier. Without another word, Adrian stepped aside and opened the door wider. "You should come inside." Elena froze. "Oh no, sir, we really shouldn't, you're already here." His voice was calm, but finot. Matteo walked in first, curiosity overpowering fear. Lily followed immediately. Within seconds, both children spotted the giant birthday cake still sitting in the dining room. Their eyes widened like they had discovered treasure. "Whoa," Matteo whispered. Lily ran closer to the table. "That one is huge." Matteo poked the frosting with one finger. Elena gasped, "Matteo," but Adrian raised a hand. "It's fine." Matteo looked up nervously. "You're not mad?" Adrian looked at the half-melted candles, then at the tiny homemade cake still in his hands, then at the two kids who clearly had no idea who he really was. "No," Adrian said quietly. "I'm not mad." Lily suddenly clapped her hands. "Then let's sing." Before Elena could react, both children burst into song. "Happy birthday to you." Their voices were loud, off-key, completely fearless. Adrian Moretti, the man whose name could silence entire rooms of criminals, stood there in the middle of his mansion, while two children sang him the worst version of the birthday song he had ever heard. And somehow, it was the best one too. For the first time that night, Adrian smiled. The sound of children laughing echoed through the enormous dining room of the Moretti mansion, a sound that had probably never existed inside those walls before. Adrian stood near the head of the table, watching as Lily and Matteo inspected the giant chocolate cake like two tiny investigators studying a crime scene. Matteo leaned closer, his eyes wide. "Is this whole thing yours?" Adrian folded his arms slowly. "Yes." Matteo blinked. "You could feed a whole school with that?" Lily immediately poked the frosting again. "Or we could just eat it." Elena covered her mouth in horror. "Lily." But Adrian didn't react the way she expected. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat down again, resting his elbows lightly on the table as he observed the two children. "Go ahead," he said calmly. Elena stared at him. "Mr. Moretti, it's cake," Adrian interrupted quietly. "Not evidence." Matteo grinned like he had just been given permission to rob a bank. Within seconds, the boy grabbed a fork and dug into the side of the cake. Lily clapped excitedly. "See? I told you Mafia bosses share." Adrian's eyebrow lifted slightly. "That's not exactly our reputation." Matteo took a bite and froze. "Wow." Lily grabbed her own fork. "Is it good?" Matteo nodded dramatically with his cheeks full. "It's the richest cake I've ever tasted." Lily immediately stuffed a bite into her mouth. Her eyes widened. "Oh my gosh." Elena stood awkwardly beside the table, clearly unsure if she should stop them or apologize again. "I'm so sorry," she murmured to Adrian. "You must think we're incredibly rude." Adrian studied her for a moment. Elena Rivera was different from the people he usually dealt with. Didn't speak with fear exactly, more like respectful caution. Her clothes were simple, her posture slightly tired, like someone used to working long hours. But what stood out most was how fiercely protective she was of the two kids. Her eyes never stopped checking on them. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair. "They're kids," he said. "That's the only group of people allowed to be rude in my house." Matteo suddenly looked up. "You have a huge house." "Yes. Do you live here alone?" Nearly dropped the napkin she was holding. "Matteo!" But Adrian answered anyway. "Yes." Matteo frowned. "That must be boring." Adrian considered that. "Sometimes." Lily climbed into the chair across from him, swinging her legs beneath the table. "Where's your family?" The question landed in the room like a quiet stone dropping into water. Elena closed her eyes briefly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Adrian's expression didn't change. "My parents are gone," he said calmly. Matteo tilted his head. "Like, on vacation?" Adrian looked at the boy for a moment. "No." Matteo slowly nodded, understanding just enough not to ask more. Lily looked down at the table for a second, then suddenly pushed the small homemade cake toward Adrian. "You should eat ours too." Adrian glanced at the tiny cake they had brought. Compared to the massive one on the table, it looked almost comically small. But something about it felt heavier, more important. "Did you make it yourselves?" he asked. Lily nodded proudly. "I stirred the frosting." Matteo raised his hand. "I cracked the eggs, and dropped one," Lily added. Matteo shrugged. "Idiappings." Adrian cut a small piece of the homemade cake. The frosting smeared unevenly under the knife. He took a bite. It was terrible, dry, too sweet. Probably baked in a tiny apartment oven that didn't heat evenly. But Adrian chewed slowly, then nodded once. "It's good." Matteo grinned. "I told you." Elena watched the moment carefully, something soft appearing in her expression. For the first time since Adrian had hired her 3 months ago, she saw something different in him. Not the cold boss everyone whispered about. Just a young man sitting at a table with 2 kids. Matteo suddenly noticed Adrian's wristwatch. "Whoa." He leaned closer. "That thing looks expensive." Adrian glanced at the watch. "It is." Matteo's eyes widened. "How expensive?" "More than a car." Matteo nearly fell off his chair. Lily gasped. "Seriously?" Adrian nodded. Matteo thought about that for a second. Then he said something that made Elena choke on air. "If you sold it, you could buy a lot more cake." Adrian actually laughed. Not a quiet chuckle. A real laugh. The sound surprised even him. Elena blinked in shock. Most of the men who worked for Adrian had probably never heard him laugh like that. Matteo pointed at the tattoos on Adrian's arm. "What do those mean?" Adrian followed his gaze. Each tattoo held pieces of his life. Wars fought. Brothers lost. Deals sealed. "Stories," Adrian said. "Like comic books?" "Not exactly." Lily leaned forward. "Did they hurt?" "Yes." Matteo nodded approvingly. "That makes them cooler." Elena shook her head. "You two asked too many questions." Matteo shrugged. "That's how you learn stuff." The room filled with another round of laughter as the children continued eating cake and arguing about whether chocolate frosting was better than vanilla. For the first time in years, Adrian found himself relaxing. The tension in his shoulders loosened. His mind stopped calculating threats and strategies for a few minutes. Instead, he just listened. Listened to Lily explaining how she wanted to become a teacher someday. Listened to Matteo describing his dream of becoming a superhero or a race car driver. Listened to Elena occasionally correcting them while trying not to smile. It felt strange, comfortable, dangerously normal. Then Adrian noticed something. Matteo was staring at him again. "What?" Adrian asked. Matteo tilted his head. "You don't look like a bad guy." Elena immediately panicked. "Matteo." But Adrian didn't look offended. Instead, he asked quietly, "What does a bad guy look like?" Matteo thought about it seriously. Mean face, big beard, yelling a lot. Adrian rubbed his clean-shaven jaw thoughtfully. "Well," he said, "I'm failing at all 3. Lily giggled. "You're just tall and serious." Matteo nodded. "And rich." Adrian leaned back again. "Those are accurate descriptions." For a moment, the room was peaceful. Then Adrian's phone vibrated in his pocket. The sudden sound instantly shifted the atmosphere. His expression sharpened slightly as he glanced at the screen. The name flashing across it made his eyes darken. Victor Romano. One of the most dangerous men in Chicago. And Adrian's biggest rival. Elena noticed the subtle change in Adrian's posture. The calm birthday atmosphere suddenly felt fragile. Adrian silenced the phone without answering. Matteo noticed. You're not picking up? Adrian placed the phone face down on the table. Not tonight. Lily smiled. Good. It's still your birthday. Adrian looked at the candles again, then at the two children sitting across from him. And for a moment, something unfamiliar crossed his mind. Maybe this was the first birthday that actually mattered. But outside the mansion gates, a black car had just pulled onto the street, and inside it, someone was watching the house very carefully. Tidrian noticed the headlights first. They appeared briefly, through the tall dining room windows, sliding slowly across the marble floor like pale ghosts before disappearing again. His eyes lifted toward the glass. A car had stopped outside the front gate. He didn't move, but every instinct inside him sharpened instantly. Years in his world had trained him to read danger before it arrived. The quiet dinner with Elena and the children had softened the tension in his body, but it hadn't erased it. Nothing ever did. Matteo was still happily attacking giant chocolate cake. Lily had frosting on her nose and didn't even know it. Elena was finally sitting down, though she still looked slightly uncomfortable being inside a mansion that probably cost more than her entire neighborhood combined. For a moment, Adrian simply watched them. Then his phone vibrated again. Victor Romano. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. He picked up the phone this time. Adrian, Victor's voice came through smoothly. Happy birthday. Adrian's eyes remained on the window. You've never called me on my birthday before. Victor chuckled softly. There's a first time for everything. Adrian didn't answer. Victor continued. I heard you're celebrating tonight. That's surprising, Adrian said calmly, since no one was invited. Oh, you're never alone, Adrian. You know that. Adrian's gaze sharpened. The car outside the gate hadn't moved. Victor's voice lowered. You've built quite the empire for someone so young, 28 years old, controlling half the city. Adrian leaned back in his chair slowly. You didn't call to compliment me. No, Victor said. I called because you're starting to forget something. Matteo suddenly laughed loudly at something Lily said. Completely unaware of the tension tightening around the room, Victor continued. Power doesn't come from kindness. Adrian's fingers tightened slightly around the phone. You're spying on my house now? Victor's tone turned cold. I'm observing. There's a difference. Adrian glanced toward the hallway leading to the front of the mansion. He could feel it now, eyes on the house, watching. Victor spoke again. I see a maid. Adrian's expression darkened. And two children. Silence filled the line. Then Victor said something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. You're getting soft. Adrian stood slowly. The movement made Elena look up immediately. Is everything okay? She asked quietly. Adrian held up one finger, asking for a moment. Into the phone he said calmly, Victor, you're sitting outside my house. Victor chuckled again. You noticed. Adrian's voice dropped into something colder. You have 10 seconds to leave. Or what? Adrian didn't hesitate. Or the next birthday you celebrate will be in a hospital. Victor laughed. You always were dramatic. Then the line went dead. Adrian stared at the phone for a moment before slipping it back into his pocket. Matteo noticed his expression. Was that a bad guy? Elena gasped softly. Matteo, but Adrian answered calmly. Yes. Matteo nodded seriously. Do you fight bad guys? Adrian considered that. Sometimes. Lily tilted her head. Like Batman? Not exactly. Before anyone could say more, footsteps echoed from the hallway. A tall man in a dark suit appeared at the doorway. Marco de Uca, Adrian's right-hand man. Marco had worked with Adrian for nearly 8 years. Early 30s, sharp-eyed, loyal to a fault. But right now his expression was tense. Boss, Marco said quietly. Adrian walked toward him. What is it? Marco lowered his voice. Romano's men are outside the gate. Adrian nodded once. I know. Marco glanced toward the dining room where Elena and the children sat. His eyebrow lifted slightly. Guests? Temporary, Adrian said. Marco lowered his voice further. We can remove Romano's car. Adrian looked toward the dining table again. Matteo was trying to stack cake slices like building blocks. Lily was laughing. Elena looked worried but was trying not to show it. Adrian thought for a moment. Then he said something that surprised Marco. No. Marco blinked. No? Adrian's voice stayed calm. He wants a reaction. Marco understood immediately. So we do nothing. Exactly. Marco nodded. Understood. As he turned to leave, Matteo called out, Hey! Marco stopped and looked confused. Matteo pointed at him. Do you want cake? Marco looked completely stunned. Adrian almost smiled again. Marco cleared his throat awkwardly. Cake. Marco walked slowly to the table like a soldier approaching an unfamiliar battlefield. Lily handed him a fork. Marco accepted it like it might explode. He took a bite. Matteo waited eagerly. Well, Marco nodded slowly. It's good. The children cheered. For a few minutes, the strange scene continued. The Mafia boss, his lieutenant, a maid, 2 children, all sitting around a birthday cake like a completely normal group of people. But Adrian's mind was elsewhere now. Victor Romano had seen something tonight, something Adrian never allowed anyone to see, a weakness, or what Victor believed was a weakness. And men like Victor didn't ignore weaknesses. They exploited them. Across the table, Lily looked at Adrian curiously. You're thinking again. Adrian blinked. What? You do that face when you're thinking? Matteo nodded, like a detective. Adrian leaned back slightly. Occupational hazard. Elena studied him carefully. Mr. Moretti, are we causing trouble for you being here? Adrian looked at her, then at the children. For a moment, the room went quiet. Finally, he said something simple. No. Matteo grinned. Good. Lily raised her fork. Then we should eat more cake. Adrian almost laughed again. But inside his mind, storm clouds were already forming. Because Victor Romano wasn't the type of man who simply watched. He was the type who waited. And Adrian knew something else too. For the first time in years, he actually had something to lose, which meant this birthday night was about to become far more dangerous than any of them realized. The laughter around the table slowly faded as the night deepened. Outside the mansion windows, the city lights flickered like distant fireflies, but Adrian's attention was fixed on something far less peaceful. The black car was still parked beyond the gates. Victor Romano hadn't left. Adrian leaned against the dining room wall, arms folded across his chest. The tattoos along his forearms stretched under the dim light, dark symbols that told stories no child should ever hear. Across the table, Lily and Matteo were finishing the last slices of cake. Frosting was everywhere, on the plates, on the table, on Matteo's cheek. Elena noticed Adrian watching the window. Her voice lowered slightly. Is someone outside? Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he checked the elegant watch on his wrist. Juni on Junana. Sights the AM, then he finally said quietly, yes. Elena's face tensed. Should we leave? Matteo looked confused. Why? Lily wiped frosting from her nose. Did the bad guy come? Adrian pushed himself off the wall and walked back toward the table. Every step was calm, controlled. The way a predator moves when it already knows it's stronger than anything around it. Elena, he said gently, how far is your apartment? She hesitated. About 20 minutes. Adrian nodded. You should head home soon. Matteo frowned. But the party just started. Adrian crouched slightly so he was eye level with the boy. Some parties have to end early. Matteo thought about that. That's lame. Adrian almost smiled. Then Marco's voice echoed from the hallway again. Boss. Adrian stood. Marco approached quickly, his expression more serious now. They're still there, Marco said quietly. 3 men in the car. Adrian nodded slowly. Victor Romano never did anything personally. He sent observers, messengers, sometimes killers. Marco glanced toward Elena and the children. You want us to escort them home? Adrian considered it. Then he shook his head. No armed convoy. That would make Romano curious. Marco frowned slightly. So what's the plan? Adrian's eyes moved back to the kids laughing softly at the table. Then he said something that surprised even himself. I'll take them. Marco blinked. You? Yes. Marco lowered his voice. That's not exactly standard boss behavior. Adrian looked at him calmly. It's also not standard for my birthday guest to be 6 years old. Marco sighed. Fair point. Meanwhile, Matteo had overheard just enough to be excited. You're driving us home? Adrian nodded. Matteo's eyes lit up. Do you have a cool car? Lily gasped. He definitely has a cool car. Adrian walked toward the front hallway. Come see. The children followed immediately. Elena hurried behind them, whispering apologies the entire way. I'm so sorry, Mr. Moretti. This has gotten completely out of hand. Adrian stopped at the door and looked at her. For the record, he said calmly, this is the most normal birthday I've had in years. Elena didn't know what to say to that. The front doors opened. Cold night air rushed in. The mansion driveway stretched toward the tall iron gates, where Victor Romano's black sedan waited in the shadows. The car's windows were tinted, but Adrian knew they were watching. Matteo didn't notice any of that. He was too busy staring at the sleek black Aston Martin parked near the entrance. Whoa. Lily grabbed his arm. That thing looks like a superhero car. Matteo turned to Adrian. Is that yours? Yes. Matteo looked like he might faint from excitement. Can we ride in it? Adrian unlocked the doors with a quiet beep. Yes. The kids exploded with joy. Elena looked horrified. Absolutely not. That car is probably worth more than its fine, Adrian said calmly. Marco leaned against the doorway behind them, watching the scene with mild disbelief. The most feared man in Chicago was about to give 2 children a ride home in a sports car. Somehow it felt completely natural. As the kids climbed into the car, Adrian glanced once toward the street. The black sedan hadn't moved. One of the windows lowered slightly. Someone inside was definitely watching now. Good. Let them watch. Adrian slid into the driver's seat, the expensive watch on his wrist glinting under the dashboard lights. Elena sat nervously in the passenger seat. The children bounced excitedly in the back. Matteo leaned forward between the seats. Does it go really fast? Adrian started the engine. The deep roar of the Aston Martin filled the driveway. Yes. Matteo grinned. Cool. As the car rolled slowly toward the gates, Adrian noticed movement in the black sedan. One of Romano's men stepped out. Tall, dark jacket, watching closely. The man made eye contact with Adrian, then smirked slightly. Adrian's expression didn't change. The gates opened. The Aston Martin passed the sedan smoothly. For a moment, the 2 cars were side by side. Adrian could feel the tension in the air. Romano's man stared through the window, then his eyes shifted toward the back seat, toward the children. Matteo waved happily. Hi. The man looked confused. Adrian pressed the accelerator. The Aston Martin shot down the street like a black arrow, leaving the sedan far behind. Inside the car, the kids were screaming with laughter. That was awesome. Elena gripped the seat nervously. Please drive slower. Adrian eased the speed down slightly, but his mind was racing faster than the car ever could. Victor Romano had seen everything. The maid, the kids, the moment of weakness. And in the Mafia world, weakness was an invocation. Lily suddenly leaned forward. Mr. Morette. Yes. Did you make a wish earlier? Adrian thought about the candles he blew out. I did. Matteo asked, What did you wish for? Adrian kept his eyes on the road. I wished for a quiet birthday. Matteo laughed. Well, that didn't work. Adrian glanced at the rearview mirror. The children were smiling, completely unaware of the danger surrounding his world. And for the first time in years, Adrian Moretti felt something he hadn't expected. Protective. Because now Victor Romano knew something important. Adrian had something he cared about. And men like Victor always came back for leverage. Which meant this story was far from over. The streets were quiet when Adrian pulled the Aston Martin to the curb in front of Eleanor Rivera's apartment building. It was a modest place. Old brick walls, narrow stairways, dim yellow lights glowing above the entrance. The kind of building most people in Adrian's world never even noticed. Matteo pressed his face against the window. This is where we live. Adrian glanced at the building carefully. 28 floors of luxury sat behind him in the Moretti mansion, yet something about this place felt warmer, more alive. He turned off the engine. The sudden silence made the city sounds return. Distant traffic, a barking dog somewhere down the street, wind rustling trash along the sidewalk. Elena exhaled slowly. Thank you for bringing us home, Mr. Motati. Her voice carried genuine gratitude now. Adrian nodded once. You're welcome. Matteo climbed out first, still buzzing with excitement. That was the fastest ride ever. Lily followed, hopping onto the sidewalk. You drive better than my mom. Elena gave her a look. Lily. Adrian stepped out of the car, towering slightly under the dim streetlight. The tattoos along his neck were visible again, dark against his skin. Matteo looked up at him with admiration. You're the coolest birthday person ever. Adrian tilted his head slightly. Birthday person? Matteo shrugged. I don't know the word for it. Adrian chuckled softly. Birthday guy works. Matteo nodded. Yeah, you're a cool birthday guy. Lily suddenly hugged Adrian around the waist before anyone could react. Elena gasped, but Adrian froze in place. The little girl's arms barely reached halfway around him. Thanks for letting us come to your party, she said. For a moment, Adrian didn't move. Then he gently patted her head. You're welcome. Elena quickly pulled Lily back, clearly embarrassed. I'm so sorry. She doesn't understand personal boundaries. Adrian shook his head. It's fine. But his eyes were scanning the street again. Carefully. Always careful. And then he saw it. A black car turning slowly at the end of the block. Romano's men. They hadn't given up. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. He looked at Elena. You should go inside. She noticed the change in his expression immediately. What's wrong? Nothing, Adrian said calmly. But his tone said everything. Elena followed his gaze and saw the car approaching. Her face paled. Are they? Adrian nodded once. Matteo noticed the tension. Is that the bad guy? Adrian crouched down slightly so he was eye level with the boy again. Matteo, yeah. Take your sister inside. Matteo looked toward the car, then back at Adrian. Are you going to fight them? Adrian's voice stayed calm. No. Matteo seemed disappointed. Okay. He grabbed Lily's hand and started toward the building. But Lily turned back for one last moment. Happy birthday, Adrian. It was the first time she had said his name. Adrian watched them disappear through the apartment door with Elena following close behind. The black sedan stopped across the street. 2 men stepped out. Adrian remained standing beside the Aston Martin, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. The first man approached slowly. You're Adrian Moretti. Adrian didn't answer. The man smirked. Victor Romano sends his regards. Adrian's dark eyes studied them calmly. You followed me 20 minutes across the city just to say hello. The second man chuckled. No. The first man glanced toward the apartment building. We were curious about your new friends. Adrian's expression hardened slightly. They're not part of my world. The man shrugged. Everything becomes part of your world. Eventually. For a moment the street went silent. Then Adrian stepped forward. His presence alone seemed to shift the air. 6'2", calm, dangerous. The streetlight reflected off his elegant watch. You should leave. The man smiled mockingly. Or what? Adrian didn't raise his voice, but his tone carried a weight that made both men pause. Or Victor Romano will lose more than a car tonight. The men exchanged a glance. They knew Adrian's reputation. Young, brilliant, ruthless, necessary. But what they had seen tonight confused them. A mafia boss laughing with children, eating cake, driving a maid home. The first man shook his head. Victor says you're changing. Adrian's eyes turned cold again. No. He took one slow step closer. I'm simply choosing what matters. The tension hung heavy for a moment. Then the man stepped back toward the sedan. We'll tell him you said that. Both men got back into the car. Within seconds, the sedan disappeared down the street. Stayed there for a few moments longer, watching carefully, making sure they were truly gone. Then he looked up toward the apartment windows. On the 3rd floor, a small light flicked on. Lily's silhouette appeared in the glass. She waved enthusiastically. Adrian lifted his hand once in return. Just once. Then he got back in the car and drove away. Over the next few weeks, something strange happened in Adrian Moretti's life. He still ran his empire, still held meetings with dangerous men, made decisions that shaped the underground world of Chicago. But every Friday night, he stopped by a small apartment building across town. Sometimes he brought pizza, sometimes cake. Matteo started calling him Boss Adrian. Lily insisted he help with her math homework. Elena still apologized constantly for everything. But slowly, she stopped looking afraid of him, and Adrian realized something unexpected. Power wasn't the most important thing he had built. Connection was, because on the night one remembered the Mafia boss's birthday. A poor maid and her 2 children had done something no rival, no enemy, and no fortune had ever done. They reminded Adrian Moretti that beneath the tattoos, the power, and the dangerous reputation, he was still human. And sometimes, the strongest men are the ones who choose to protect kindness instead of destroying it. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Cinematic Mafia Love for more powerful stories like this. Your support keeps these stories alive.